Remember back in Lesson 2 in Genesis 11, we saw that God chose Abraham, calling him to be his own, promising to bless him and the world through him. Another important aspect of God's relationship with Abraham was the covenant he made with him. Just as in the last lesson, we looked back at the Passover in Exodus to help us understand Jesus as the Passover lamb, now we're going to look back at the covenant God made with Abraham to help us understand the new covenant made through Jesus. In Genesis 17, God reiterated his promise of a son and expanded on his promise to be Abraham's God. He said, "I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. My covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and kings shall come forth from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant." So what is God's role here? First of all, he initiated the covenant. He said, "I will establish it," beginning with Abraham and continuing it through the generations that would come as he promised to multiply Abraham's family into many nations. He committed to being their God. What does God say is Abraham's part? He calls him to keep the covenant, which means be faithful to him as their God. He also commands every male be circumcised as a sign of the covenant. So why did God use circumcision as a mark of his covenant? It is a physical act, but God always intended it to be more than just that. Requiring trust and surrender, it is symbolic of a spiritual condition of obedience to God. Even in the Old Testament, the physical act of cutting off flesh was never sufficient in itself, as God makes clear in several passages. In Deuteronomy, Moses reminded the people of Israel, "To the Lord your God belongs the highest heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth and everything in it. Yet the Lord set his affection on your forefathers and loved them, and he chose you, their descendants, above all nations, as it is today. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. For the Lord your God is God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome. Fear the Lord your God and serve him. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live." Later, the prophet Jeremiah, calling God's wayward people to return to the Lord, said, "Circumcise yourselves to the Lord, circumcise your hearts," making it clear to those who thought that being physically circumcised was enough to guarantee their special status with God, that it was not. "The days are coming," declared the Lord, "when I will punish all who are circumcised only in the flesh. Even the whole house of Israel is uncircumcised in heart." What is cut off in the act of circumcision? Nothing crucial like a hand or a foot or an eye, but unnecessary flesh. The word flesh in the Bible sometimes just means body, as when God promises that Abraham will have a son of his own flesh and blood to be his heir. But often the word flesh is used as a symbol of sin, of all that is in opposition to or apart from God. We'll come back to this idea in a bit. Unfortunately, as we've seen, God's people repeatedly turned their backs on him. Deuteronomy continues on, telling us, "This people abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, the covenant he made with them when he brought them out of Egypt. They went off and worshipped other gods and bowed down to them, gods they did not know, gods he had not given them." So, the covenant that God had made with Abraham was broken, and then the people sent into exile. It was clear that humans could never live up to their end of the deal. God allowed this first covenant to be made with his people and then broken by his people, to show us our inability to be in relationship with the holy God on our own merits. But God is persistent in his pursuit of those he loves. From the beginning of time, God had another plan. When God's people were in exile, the prophet Jeremiah brought good news, promising a new covenant to replace the broken one. "Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more." The New Testament tells us that the old covenant that God made with Abraham is now obsolete, having been replaced by the new covenant, by the Messiah, or to use the Greek word, Christ. Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. The Apostle Paul explained to the early church, "In Christ you were also circumcised, with a circumcision not performed by human hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised by Christ." This new covenant does not require us to cut off our literal flesh. But remember, the word flesh is used to describe everything that is in opposition to God. For example, Romans says, "Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace." The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. There are two ways to respond to God in the flesh. One, outright disobedience, doing whatever we want, is more obvious. This is licentiousness. The other is more subtle, following the letter of the law, but not the heart. This is legalism. God never desires his people to observe legalism. This is clear in the Old Testament, in Jesus' teachings, and in the rest of the New Testament. Nevertheless, he also makes it clear that this is not an excuse for licentiousness. The removal of flesh in Old Covenant circumcision signified identity as the people of God, submission to God, and vulnerability. The same is true of a heart circumcised towards God. We set aside those things in which we find our worldly identity to instead have our identity in him. We submit our wills to God, and we allow him control over our lives. In your study questions today, you'll look more at this new covenant as prophesied in Jeremiah and as described by the Apostle Paul in his letters. Paul encouraged the followers of Jesus of their new life in this new covenant, writing, "When you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross." May you receive the forgiveness of Christ and live fully the new life he gives us.